Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of Simple Insights, a series of interviews with today's leading thinkers in the field of civilization design, collective intelligence, and conscious evolution. In a world confronted with global warming, pandemics, increasing inequality, and political polarization, Simple Insights aims to bring light to the darkness and chart a course towards a cooperative global society. I'm your host, Robert Cobbold, and today I'm going to be speaking to Emil Ejner Friis. Emil is one of the co-founders of Metamodernism and one of the central figures in the new emerging worldview of Metamodernism. And currently he does exactly what he feels like when he feels like it. Hello, Emil.
Hello there.
So this is probably a question that you were expecting. What is Metamodernism?
Well, do you want the long story or the short one?
Tell me what the short one is, and then I'll tell you if I need a longer one.
The short one is that metamodernism is what comes after postmodernism.
We're going to need a longer one, I think.
We'll need a longer one. We'll need to agree what we're talking about. We could talk about in the art that it's a sort of like what comes after postmodern art. We could talk about a certain aesthetic. We can talk about a psychological level of development that you think metamodernly, or we can talk about a societal level of development.
I suppose it's the second two I'm most interested in.
Yes. I don't know if your crowd is know about integral theory.
Almost certainly, yeah. And Simple as an idea, which is a political innovation, which I'll explain a bit later, it pretty much sort of requires that almost that level of thinking and individual development to understand it. And there's a huge amount of crossover. Our fans tend to be big fans of metamodernism and integral theory.
And basically, you know, what comes after the green meme, or in integral, in spiral dynamics language, and then some call it integral. We have chosen to call it metamodernism because integral is kind of like, it's a more narrow, it's like integral trademark Ken Wilber as certain, and metamodernism is more open. It's an open term, just like socialism or liberalism. And we are also more political than the interview. You could say, let us start the interview this way. What is metamodernism? Who are we as political metamodernists? And we are to Ken Wilber what Marx was to Hegel, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. It might not make perfect sense for people who aren't so familiar with Ken Wilber and integral theory. So I'm keen, can you give us sort of a broad level overview of what the kind of sensibilities are of a metamodernist? How does he sort of, and we'll get on to the stages of development later, but just to kind of broad, what are the sort of values or sensibilities of a metamodernist, and how is it different from postmodernism?
How is it different from postmodernism? Let's take it on societal level. Like, we're currently living in a very postmodern society. It is still a capitalist society. It is based off production, but we've made things a little bit nicer. You know, you're not allowed to be racist anymore, thank God. You know, and we accept homosexuals. You know, and we try to make everything softer and, you know, kind of like build like a soft varnish around this brutal capitalist society. But still, it doesn't really make way with capitalist society. And we want to figure out what is the next level of society that brings about a whole new engine of thinking and production and being. So it's if you think about the society that we are in now, it's culturally a society very, very postmodern in, you know, the developed parts of the world, and we have all this, you know, irony, and, you know, we have this, you know, everything has been kind of like flattened, and which we walk around with this, you know, ironic armor, and nothing matters, and we relativize everything all the time. And there's a lot of many insights from the postmodern value meme that are important. But we would like to integrate both like the modern values and the postmodern values, and bring it into a new level. So it's like, we have this, sincere irony, for example, which is, and always this both and thinking. Often, we are stuck in political thinking because we think in either that or this. And we will try to, with metamodernism, to try to bridge those two sides, but reach a higher synthesis. Instead of a compromise, how can we reach a higher synthesis? How can we use the wisdom and the knowledge from all of the previous levels of levels of development? So in that way, it's very similar to Integral. I was hugely inspired by the Ken Wilber and the Integral movement. But I also found out that we came from a sociological and societal academic background, that the understanding of society was very poor, and people were very much into like New Age spirituality. So you could say that metamodernism is a secular and politicized version of Integral.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Ken Wilber myself, and I know it's influenced Simpol as well as a concept. And Simpol is essentially a political project which aims to kind of put into practice some of the insights of the evolutionary worldview, whether it's metamodernism or Integral. Are you familiar with Simpol as an idea, or shall I give you a brief overview?
Yes, I met John Bunsell, I think it was 8 years ago. I think it was 2012. On the Integral political conference in, was it Austria? I think it was in Austria, in the Alps. And, we immediately found each other and found out that we were some of the few people who actually had a political vision. And I fell in love with the idea of Simpol. It's so simple. Yes. And you just think, this is the way we should, obviously solve many of these global wicked problems.
Fab. Okay,
so I'm
great.
Very well aware of Simpol.
Okay,
I haven't
great.
Bunsell in a while, but
well, he's very well, I can tell you. Okay, so we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty later, and about how Simpol relates to metamodernism and how they might be able to complement each other. But I just wanted to start off by asking, so it's clear to the average person on the street that there's something, even without looking at the sort of fallout from the US election, even before that, I think it's clear to the average person on the street that there's something very wrong with politics today, that in some way our democracies cannot handle the complexity of modern society and the biggest issues that we face. Are these concerns valid? And why do you think our democracies are failing in this way?
Well, we're in the middle of a huge transition from one level of development to another. And that always brings trouble around. If we look at Trump and to a certain degree Brexit and Boris Johnson in the UK, these are products of postmodernism. They are a reaction, a reactionary movement against all of these postmodern ideas that a lot of people gravitating towards modernism, but even post-Faustianism, feel like that about. Like there wouldn't have been a Trump if people hadn't been fed a lot of political correctness and queer theory here and feminism there and multiculturalism and all these kind of things. It's a direct reaction from a part of the population gravitating towards a lower value mean. And had the dominant value mean still been gravitating towards the modern, we wouldn't have seen a reaction like this. And the failure of the left in the moment is exactly that lack of awareness that there are different levels of development, that people gravitate towards different value means, and that people are allergic, that the things that people don't have that awareness that the thing that you find the most fairest, the beautiful, the right thing to do, that other people almost have a physical reaction of disgust against that. And that will make them, act against what you think is the right thing to do. We need to have that awareness that people gravitate towards different value means.
Yeah, and certainly, like, I think if you're aware of spiral dynamics of integral, you've just been watching that whole thing play out, going, but just to clarify, it's not that metamodernism is at all against any of those postmodern ideas, I'm assuming. It's just, is it just about the way they've been conveyed, or the way they've been, or sort of the lack of sensitivity to other value means?
Oh, yeah, among other things, but also that postmodernism will only create this varnish. It is not capable of outcompeting the modern capitalist society, exactly like post-Faustianism, what in spiral dynamics language would be blue, with Christianity and the big actual world religions. It didn't make away with the brutal engine of organized violence that was, the primary organizing principle of society. It made society a little softer. We abolished slavery in Europe, but then within Islam, then they could enslave each other, and then they could enslave black people and these kind of things. But people think things got a little softer, but it was basically, the Roman Empire in disguise. Like the basic management principle was still violence until money capital came around. And now, still, yes, then we have like we can have, vegan hamburgers in recyclable bags, and, now we're going to have different kind of straws, and then we can language police each other so we don't say bad words, but it's like basically the same, oppressive society, just with a thin varnish of niceness around it. And that's why we need metamodernism. Metamodernism will be capable of outcompeting capitalism. And in Nordic ideology, we have the new 6 forms of politics that will create a metamodern society, which postmodern thinkers, people gravitating towards postmodernism, currently are not capable to do. All the things that they want to do, all their values, they will not succeed. They will make it a little nicer, but they will not succeed. Just like the Christians, they did not succeed. They failed. Christianity was a failure to bring about the teachings of Christ. The political postmodern left is incapable of creating the sustainable queer feminist society that they want. They will never do it. Metamodernism will create something that is more similar to that. They will succeed because they understand the different value means. They understand how society acts. They understand how human psychology works.
It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day that was actually, I think it had Daniel Schmachtenberger, and he was just pointing out, how did we go from the teachings of Christ to the Crusades? Like under the name of Christianity, we were killing violently, brutally, in the name of Christianity. It's like, how did we go so far away? And I think that sort of proves your point to a certain degree. So just to stick on why I think democracy is unraveling a bit, so part of Simpol's analysis is that, we've got global markets, but national governance. So countries are kind of forced into pursuing a narrow range of business-friendly policies so they don't lose big business and all the jobs they attract and the investment, etc. And you have this kind of race to the bottom to have the lowest corporation tax, etc. And so people feel that basically whoever they vote for, nothing changes. Because whoever's in power, they have to play this game of remaining internationally competitive. And so everyone just feels like it's choosing between sort of Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Until, of course, someone like Trump comes along, who then everyone's like, aha, now we have an option. But of course, it's a worse option. And so we call this pseudo-democracy. Do you think that kind of lack of options, or the constraints that national governments are under to be internationally competitive, is leading to political polarization to some degree?
Well, obviously, we have seen that the deindustrialization of the US, the entire, the Rust Belt that has appeared in the US has left to, you have two countries now. You also see that in other countries, in England, in the north, you have a similar Rust Belt. You see that our societies, because they are connected to the global market, that you get an A and a B team. You have this polarization between rich people in the urban centers and poor people in the, and that is accelerating because we live in this global reality, because the differences that were between countries, 50 years ago, with the global market and the the emergence of new industrial superpowers like China and now India, is leading that these differences that we had between countries are now within countries, and that's definitely because we don't have regularly. But then of course it's also that we can only start regulating that when all countries are on the same level, right? Because is it fair that, hey, working class here in the rich West, we would like to have a very high level of consumption, but shouldn't the workers in China and India also,
And I suppose Simple aims to kind of address that by having sort of multi-issue frameworks where issues can be debated, because the UN currently discusses issues like climate change on a single issue basis. So of course there are some winners and some losers. So, if you're Vanuatu or Tonga, you're really keen on environmental regulations, but if you're America, big polluter, not so much. So you need to be able to have trade-offs. You need to be able to cut a deal in some sense so that, America can gain in some senses and loses in others, and everyone can be allowed to develop in, at the level that they're at. So you point the way forward in the listening society. You point to the Nordic countries as an example of where, where we might be headed. And you talk about this idea of green social liberalism 2.0, which is basically kind of political philosophy which combines high welfare, environmental protection, and market economies as well. So they're still essentially sort of free market to a certain degree. Do you think it's possible to achieve green social liberalism 2.0 without a degree of global cooperation?
I actually believe that certain countries can just move ahead and create the listening society that we are talking about. Currently, we see that the two countries that are in the lead, in my opinion, like Finland and New Zealand, they can just continue to be very strong players on the global market. And have prosperity at home, well-working institutions, democratic institution, and then just fine-tweak them. Yes, I think that's what we will see. We will see other countries like the UK and the US, because of their institutions, democratic institutions, or societal institutions in general, that they will lag behind. I believe that in the future, that the difference between a country like the US and that of Finland will be the same as that between the US and Mexico.
Wow.
Not that the US and the UK will be a third world country. They will be second world countries. And we will see small glimmers of hope in the global system, small nimble states that will develop quietly, while many of the bigger economies are struggling with whatever they're struggling with. And suddenly 10, 20, 30 years down the line, we'll see, wait a second, that country is qualitatively of a higher level than many other first world countries.
So the pushback, I suppose, would be, that the two countries that you cited, and indeed all the Nordic countries, are small, largely ethnically and culturally homogenous to a certain degree, much more so than the US or the UK, for example, and they're small countries with small populations. So how do we know that model is replicable with much bigger and more ethnically and culturally diverse countries?
I don't know. And maybe a certain country will need to break up. But I do believe that that ethnic homogeneity is not an important factor. If we take Finland, they have, like, you know, a Finnish-speaking majority and a Swedish-speaking minority. You know, they don't even speak the same language in that country. If you take New Zealand, I think it's like 15% of the population there is, you know, native Maori, you know, Polynesian descent, whereas the rest are of various European ethnicities and, you know, Asian ethnicity. You also see a country like Canada is doing very well, being a very ethnic, heterogeneous society. But what it comes down to, I believe, are institutions. We need to, because you can take a country like Albania. You know, they don't have very strong institutions. It's a very small and homogeneous society, but their institutions are rather weak. So I don't think it has to do with size. I don't think it has to do with ethnicity. It has to do with institutions. We just happen to see that some of the countries out there with the strongest institutions who can, you know, develop, happen to be very small. And I would say, I live in Germany at the moment, and I'm very impressed about this country. I believe that this is the first major economy that can develop towards becoming, you know, a progressive meta-modern society in the future. Before other European bigger economies.
Well, it would certainly be great if it was possible before we could reach global cooperation. And I certainly, you know, those countries that you cite certainly seem to be going in the right direction. But I mean, for example, it's very difficult to provide high welfare when companies can move their money across borders and countries in a race to the bottom to achieve low corporation tax. Or it's quite hard to have good environmental protection laws when there's a sort of game theoretical disincentive to sign up to the Paris Climate Agreement, but then not meet your targets. So, you know, and even animal welfare, I know in the listening society is something that's is mentioned quite a lot. You know, the UK's just leaving the EU, and we had very good food standards, very high food standards, and now we're forced into cutting those standards to make a trade deal with the US. So that's a classic example of how the less you cooperate with other countries around you, the more you're forced into these game theoretical races to the bottom to have the lowest, you know, regulations. So surely, well, I mean, in that sense, I hope, do you not see Simpol and Metamodernism is very conducive to one another, that if we did have global governance, then green social liberalism would be far easier to achieve?
Yes, I agree. And we also see that many of these smaller, very well-developed states, what they're very good at is collaborating with other countries. You know, if you take the Scandinavian countries, you know, they have like a Nordic cooperation, you know, and, you know, apart from Iceland and Norway, they're in EU, but actually Norway is an EU member. They just, de facto. And these countries are very good at cooperating with other countries, and we see it is hard. You see, you know, you have like very high taxes and very high requirements on and still, you know, the Scandinavian countries are some of the richest and happiest in the world. And I also believe that is a competitive factor. When suddenly, okay, so people in those countries, you know, they're happier, they're richer, and, you know, the environment is cleaner, and that is competitive, I believe.
Actually, the last interview was with a man called Simon Anholt, who's written something called the Good Country Index, which basically he advises governments on exactly that basis. You know, governments come to him saying, look, we want to improve our national brand or national image. And he says, well, be seen to do good then, you know, do something good for the world. And that actually will make you more competitive if you're attracting investment and able to do things better and cheaply. But I do still think that there are some issues where the incentives are not aligned. And I think you do need global cooperation to achieve those.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. But it's funny you mentioned, I remember that one, the good country, and the goodest country in the world is Ireland.
Yeah, it's changed now. It's Finland.
Oh, it's Finland now. Okay, that's another one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Because Ireland is quite interesting. It's also because it used to be one of the poorest countries in the world, basically a British colony with a very conservative Catholic population, and today it's one of the richest and happiest and also goodest countries in the world. Ireland is still relatively, conservative. But the trick, the secret is good institutions. See that again, and there's also another. You see that all the countries that have gained independence from, or like white countries that have gained independence from the UK, are all doing better than the country they gained their independence from. If you look at Ireland, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, they are all doing better. And if we look at the UK and the US, some of the oldest, democracies in the world, the problems are rising from very, very old institutions, like just understanding the American democratic, how it works with it's running on very, very old software. And the same it is with the UK. And if we take a country like Germany, or Finland, that are countries that were established in the 20th century. And if you look at the institutions that were, it's easier when an institution is wiped out and you build something new. If you look at their constitutions, these are like the secret to many countries' success, that they have, a very solid foundation in the form of effective institutions and, modern legislation that,
I've just read something by a think tank called Rethinking X, and it talks about these new technologies coming our way. They're going to make possible a radically different society, but our operating systems are well out of date, our institutions, exactly. So hierarchies have become a kind of faux pas in progressive circles, but it's a big feature of metamodernism. And you make the case that understanding the stages of human development is the key to emancipation, to freedom, and to equality in the globalized internet age. Saying if you fail to understand hierarchies and human development, you end up being primitive, conservative, and oppressive. How?
Well, you will end up oppressing other people. If you don't have the sensitivity towards understanding that people gravitate towards other values than your own, if you don't have that empathy of trying to imagine what is the other person feeling, why is the other person feeling, if you have this like postmodern attitude that people don't have your opinions because there's something wrong with them, you will end up being oppressive. You will end up being conservative too, like the postmodernists out there, attacking us from all sides, the haters. No, we used to be the progressive and the good guys. Why are you suddenly the good guys? Because I mean, like, if you don't understand other people, if you believe, and if you don't understand yourself either, if you don't bust your own bullshit, because like, why are you, language policing out there? Is it that you're going to do them a favor, tell them, hey, I have the right words you should use? No, you're doing it to feel better about yourself, so you can feel that you are higher in the hierarchies of ethics, so you just want to feel like a better person. So I believe that if you understand about these value memes, these levels of development, you will understand other people better, but you will also understand yourself better. You then better able at busting your own bullshit.
Yeah. Which God knows we all need to be better at that. You then present a few in the listening society, sort of a few caveats are presented before you dive into the topic of developmental hierarchies. And even in my own attempts to talk about developmental hierarchies, I've realized that these caveats are really important. So before we get into the meat of what they are, these developmental hierarchies, what are some of the caveats that we should be aware of before discussing these kind of things?
Beware, this is crack cocaine, right? It's crack cocaine. You know, our whole limbic system, our monkey brain, you know, is just hardwired to be very, very sensitive towards anything that has to do with hierarchies, because we want to be at top of the hierarchies. We don't want to be at the end of the hierarchies. Like there's even like, you know, evidence that, you know, monkeys that are lower in the hierarchies, you know, they have a lower level of dopamine in your brain, right? Like being on top of a hierarchy makes you feel good. You know, it's crack cocaine. It just shuts out dopamine into your brain, right? And I have seen that in the integral community, that people, they start obsessing about these hierarchies, like where are people, where am I located, you know, and of course then, you know, because we are very smart, and especially the integrals are very smart people. And with all that intelligence, you know, you devise all these narratives about why you are higher in the hierarchies, and maybe you also have certain privileges because you are so good and so amazing, and all this. And suddenly, you know, we end up having a club where we are like patting each other's back, you know, congratulating ourselves about how high level, how high stage we are. And start analyzing others, and in the end, that's what it's all about, and not about changing the world. That's what I see in the integral community. You know, it has zero capacity to change the world.
Interesting, big claim. I hope Ken isn't watching. All right, well, with that said, and, you know, I think just personally, I think, you know, this has to be handled with great sensitivity, and that, you know, we can't conflate. I think that the other thing for me that's really important is that, and you'll explain what these hierarchies are in a minute of individual development, but we can't conflate being, you know, having a high value mean with being a good person. You know, it seems to me, right? Right, and that's the mistake, isn't it? You know, is that just you can have someone with very postmodern progressive values who can be a real dick, just as you can have a sort of very conservative traditional church vicar who's a very upstanding gent, but is maybe a bit homophobic. You know, so it's sort of like the complexities and ambiguities are everywhere. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. But with that said, walk us through what are the hierarchies of human development, and how do they intersect, and why do we need to know about them if we're to bring about a metamodernism, modern society?
Are you referring to the stages?
Yeah, the stage, code, state, and depth. But just give me a brief overview of that.
You mean, yes. So, all right. Why did we write this book? Why did we mean we had something to say about psychological development that hasn't been said already? And because we noticed that, okay, these, like, you know, spiral dynamics and these stages, they like intuitively, you know, it makes sense. Okay, that guy is modern and that's the postmodern guy. But still there was like, you notice that you could have someone gravitating towards postmodern thought, and who was not a very complex thinker, you know, might be a very deep thinker, you know, have a lot of spiritual depth, but not very complex about society. And the same thing, you know, you meet someone who's like obviously gravitating towards modernism, but like a very, very complex thinker. And we came with that, wait a second, we actually have, like, psychological development is made out of four aspects. You know, first we thought about, okay, on the one hand, there's complexity and there's depth, and we were very inspired by MHC model of hierarchical complexity by Michael Commons. And you know, that's the only one that is mathematically measurable. And then, you know, you could be really, really high stage, you know, in terms of complexity, but that doesn't say anything about your depth, you know, how your spiritual depth. And then we came up with that, and there were also like two others, and one is code, that it plays an enormous role. What kind of code, like what kind of stuff you've been reading, what kind of ideas. Like, I mean, you know, you can be very, very deep and relatively high complexity, but if the only thing you've been reading is Christian theology, yeah, you are probably gonna still gravitate towards post-Faustianism, pre-modern thought. So it really makes a difference what kind of code that you have absorbed. And then there's also the one with state, right? State. You could say that in the way that the complexity is your capacity to handle, different units of code, then depth is your capacity to handle or to integrate, I would say, integrate different states, like psychological states. And you can be in high states and in low states. And I mean, from many people who have never reached, the higher states, the cosmic orgasms, and just been feeling that they are the whole universe, or haven't felt, being really tormented hell where reality breaks down. If you're just like average, okay, most of the time you don't develop a lot of depth. It is usually, the very deep people have been the one who have been capable of integrating the very lows of existence and the very highs. So we came up with that, that an aggregate of these four factors, code, state, complexity, and depth, that makes up your value meme, or the degree to which you gravitate towards a certain value meme, because we always gravitate, to more value memes at once.
And it certainly seems like in our attempts to sort of explain and elucidate the idea of SimPol, why we need global governance, and also why it needs to happen in this sort of careful game theoretical way where no one is acting against their self-interest, it seems that you do often hit a wall, and that could be one of two walls. It's either the wall that people don't have the cognitive complexity to sort of really see why it's necessary. They can see like, oh yeah, global cooperation is probably a good idea and a few things, but they don't understand why it's necessary to have SimPol. They don't really click with it. Or equally, you can hit a wall with postmodernists, perhaps, who just think, no, hierarchies are bad, we don't want global governance, and they sort of throw the whole idea out. Or equally, pre-modern, or what you call post-Faustian or Faustian value memes, where they just don't see that global cooperation is a good idea. So I think certainly it's the key to unlocking, the sort of understanding of some of these ideas. And yet, obviously, it's not that easy to kick people up a level in cognitive complexity. It's quite, it's just hard to develop. And so, how do you think we can sort of package metamodernism and SimPol to people who maybe don't have high cognitive complexity, or maybe lower effective value meme?
Don't. The thing is that in order to understand what we are right, you need to be at least on meta-systematic in terms of complexity. If you are on if you're below systematic formal, you will, if you are sympathetic towards the contents, develop a flattened version, right? That's also what we see with many postmoderns. Like, you need to be roughly on systematic to properly approach like postmodern contents. But a lot of people aren't formal and they develop a flattened version. So I believe that we just need to go ahead. Like the ones that, I'm not gonna try and, I can wear some pink pants, but I will not try to try to sell it to people who will not, this is avant-garde, this is the elite, and fine with that. It will, because think about like our society, that we live in this very, very complex society. No one knows how it works, and its legal foundations and institutions, have been developed, by some very, very, very smart people on high complexity. And the rest of us, we just live in it, and then you get a job in a and then you are capable of being staff rolled to do things that are actually above your complexity level. But like trying to sell this to a broader audience, I think is gonna be less efficient than just going out there and find your peers and get the band together and build a concert hall for metamodernists and build metamodern culture, which is what I'm doing here in Berlin. It's probably the most progressive big city in Europe, and to attract as many metamodernists as possible, and then create a culture, and then that culture will become an agent that will change society, a society that the rest of us are just living in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense to me, but I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a sort of postmodern thinker, and it sounds like a sort of dystopia that you're describing, a load of elites getting together and conspiring and saying, we're going to create society and don't worry, it's all going to work for you guys. I mean, these are dangerous ideas. And why is it worth the risk, or how can you alleviate some of those concerns? Because that can be done nicely, but it can also go very, very wrong. And history shows us more often than not, it does go wrong.
Yeah. Because when we're talking about an elite here, I'm not talking about these like Eton snobs or something like that.
I went to Eton, by the way.
I'm talking about probably, an autistic kid living in his mother's basement, but who happens to be gifted and gravitate towards metamodernism. That's what I'm talking about. People often talk about what is our demographic. And yes, people tend to be younger than the average. I would say like our demographic is like a 2-year-old girl, right? Like the ones growing up right now are going to be metamodernists. But we are talking about people who cognitively are capable of absorbing our contents, and many of them are, member of the creative class, precariat, like guys living in their mother's basement, old guys who have been like experimenting with psychedelics back in the 60s and doing art, that is the, elite that I'm talking about. All these freaks and strange people out there who come to us. That is the elite. And that is the avant-garde. And those are the people that I would love to come here to Berlin and turn into the metamodern warriors of the future. Because what we need to build each other up. There's a lot of, we're broken warriors. We've, like the further away you are from the mainstream value meme, the worse you feel, right? And just like take, all these ISIS guys or Hells Angels, they're miserable. Fucking miserable, and the Nazis, because if you aren't gravitating towards Forstianism, and society is modern, transitioning to a postmodernism, you feel like shit. It feels awful, and of course you react by blowing things up. The same thing is that if you are gravitating towards metamodernism or even something higher, like this society just feels like it's all wrong. There's nothing for you to, and also like the gifts that you have, the things that you want to give to society are not adopted by the marketplace, and you end up in a precarious situation, and you end up with mental sicknesses. Like the mental health of a lot of progressive people is horrible, and it's not because there's something wrong with them. It's because this society doesn't fit their emotional wiring. And that's something I would like to change by creating a metamodern culture. Like the postmodernists, they have their culture, they have their clubs and their things. But to all of those who feel alienated even by, progressive and the postmodern culture out there, there's nothing but like loose connections on the internet. And I would like to change that so that there will be a physical space, gatherings, events here in Berlin, where we can create a metamodern culture. Because all these plans about, I started out 8 years ago, and we thought that we were like going to change the world politically, and it was like, it just felt like we had this garden hose with like gold coming out of it, but they're just like desert, nothing happened. And then we looked at our own theories and found, wait a second, we're doing it all wrong. Because politics is always last. Art is first. Art and culture. In order to create a metamodern revolution, we will need to create a metamodern culture first, and it always starts with art. In our next book, you will see that development historically is tilted. It always starts with art, and then later, at the end you have ethics, right? We are not going to create this metamodern society that we want anytime soon, but we can create, small oases of metamodern thought and acting.
Well, don't be surprised if you see me popping up in Berlin in a few months. So another thing that seems to be very important in metamodernism, and one of its critiques, is that political thinking so far seems to be, you have the sort of left wing which thinks, it's all about the state, and the right wing thinks it's sort of all about the market. And then you've got sort of anarchists who think that civil society is the answer to all our problems, and that one of these three areas is sort of more fundamental than the others and dictates to the others. You can think about that the other way you phrase it is solidarity, trade, or competition. That you've got these three different kind of aspects of society. And you argue that we need to, first of all, get over the idea that one is more fundamental than the other, or one is always the correct tool for solving a set of problems. And then you say that we need to integrate them all to form a healthier society. So how can we integrate them, and why isn't it true that one is more fundamental than the others?
Well, again, that's why I am using the term both and all the time, just to get away from this either or thinking that we have. Is it the market? I just turn off when I hear the political debate out there. I don't know. I would believe again, that is a cultural change. That we need to change the way we think about these things. And for that, that's what can we do? We can try to rewrite the code of our society. That's what we are trying to do, so people don't fall into these false what's it called?
Dichotomies.
Exactly.
Another thing that you bring up is this sort of two twin mistakes of game denial or game acceptance.
Yes.
What do you mean by those two things, and why are they both mistakes?
Mm-hmm. If we take the conservatives, conservatives, they tend to gravitate towards game acceptance. That life is hard, and there are winners and losers, but it's fair. That's the way it is. We just need to accept it. And hey, I just happen to be a winner, but that's the way it is. And of course, that is we don't need to treat each other if we can actually, it doesn't need to be this way. The other way is game denial, and the left tends to fall into the trap of denying that there is a game at all. For example, that okay, if you and I we want the same job, and there's only one position available, well, there's going to be a game. There's going to be a winner and a loser. Or if we want the same spouse, we live in a world with limited resources. Everyone can't have everything all the time, and we need to accept that. With game, we will say a game change is that, okay, so if there is a game at the moment, and can we make it fairer? Can we make it more kind? Okay, there's still gonna be winners and losers in the future. That's undeniable. But when you lose, could we make the consequences less harsh? Think about if you lived in the Roman Empire back then, in Rome in the 1st century AD. Well, if you lost in the game, you would die, right? Then, you know, we have developed that game that, all right, if you lose in society's games today, okay, you may end up alone and poor. All right. Could we in the future make it even kinder, even more fair? You know, give extra chances to win in the game. That is a discussion which instead of, you know, being again in two camps, one saying, no, this is the way it is fair, and we shouldn't change anything, or the other, no, there's no game, we all need to be friends, and it's just because you guys are evil. That, hey, could we talk about, can we change these little games of everyday life so that more of us will fare better, that there'll be more winners, less losers, and when you lose, it will be less harsh. That is a discussion I would like to see in the future political discourse, rather than having these two camps.
I suppose if I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, you know, if I'm a postmodernist, I'm thinking, well, but that's what the postmodernist thing is all about. That's all we're trying to do, is make the game a bit fairer. And you know, we're trying to make things a bit more even, and you know, what is it that postmodernism is? Well, first of all, we've done a lot of postmodernism bashing. So let's first of all give it its due. You know, what are the valuable insights that we want to integrate and take with us from postmodernism? And at the same time, why do you think it fails? Why can't it bring about the society that you point to? I mean, it's done a fairly good job of bringing it around in New Zealand, let's say, for example, right? So why can't it lead to a sort of totally different society along meta-modern lines?
The short answer is that postmodernism doesn't have a clue how to outcompete capitalism. You cannot bring about a different kind of society if you don't have a plausible alternative to capitalism. And we see that, you know, all that on the postmodern left, that yes, capitalism is bad, we should abolish it and blah, 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 but there's never any credible alternatives. You need to have an alternative to capitalism. You need to pinpoint, like, what are the mechanisms that are going to replace or outcompete the current ones. Because if we see, you know, a lot of, you know, on the left, if you're still, oh, we should, you know, take more people from the rich and give to the poor, which is often a good idea, but you're still in the capitalist game. You know, it's still the same society that is based on monetary exchanges.
So what are some of those mechanisms or leverage points that you think metamodernism sees or addresses that postmodernism doesn't?
The postmodernists, they don't see how emotional energy and cultural capital can outcompete money capital. They are too obsessed about how unfair it is that some people have more money capital than others. They don't see the alternative to money capital. And let me give you an example what I mean with the emotional energy. Again, we can make like this a little developmental history. If you take Faustian society, you know, that was based on organized violence, right? Like, you point a spear at someone and they give you your stuff, you know, and then you point it more and you shouldn't be there. Like, society was based on a monopoly on violence. Even with the actual religions, you know, and Christianity and everything got softer, that was still the basic engine of society, you know. Someone's got the biggest army, and that person decides what will happen. You know, that person manages, you know, the entire economy. So what happened was that when you had an abundance of violence, you know, like with the early modern state, suddenly, you know, you had like police, you had like an abundance of organized violence. You had so much that people were actually, you know, relatively safe, you know. And then suddenly, under those circumstances, money capital could outcompete violence capital as the dominant principle in society. Suddenly, people were more concerned about, you know, their monetary exchanges than security. because there was an abundance of security. And I believe, in the most wealthy societies in the world, that I'm talking about, with with a welfare state where people are very safe, where there's material abundance. You already now see that money capital, the importance of money capital, has begun to dwindle. That you point, okay, you before you pointed like a spear at someone, and then they did what you said, but it's like very well, but burdensome, very expensive, because the moment you don't point a spear at them, they do what they want, right? And then they found, okay, if you point a fistful of dollars at someone, they would actually do the things you wanted them to do without you having to point that fistful of dollars at them. But what can outcompete that fistful of dollars? An idea, because what a spear, what a fistful of dollars, what it does is that it creates an emotional response. It creates emotional energy, right? And if you are able to present an alluring idea, that can actually be more effective than just money, if you have all your material needs met, right? And we see that, among a lot of creative young people, that they will rather do something they would rather express themselves artistically, or save the world, or do something that doesn't necessarily, give them more money, because they have what they need. And a lot of employers today are complaining that they have difficulties motivating young people with fistfuls of dollars. And in the future, the ones, who are able to create the most alluring symbols, they will be very, very powerful, and they will outcompete money in the same way that money outcompeted organized violence.
Mm. Well, God, that's
but that is cultural capital.
Mm. Well, that's certainly validated a lot of my sort of life choices. I'm, I suppose you could probably be considered as a precariat at the moment. I don't have a full-time job, trying to spread a kind of cultural idea of conscious evolution, and I've certainly had all my needs met all my life, so I fall pretty almost embarrassingly well into that category. Just one thing I wanted to pick up on there, in green social liberalism, you say that market economies are part of the deal. We want market economies, we want high welfare, we want environmental protection, and yet you talk about outcompeting capitalism. So, I mean, often when we use the word capitalism, 10 people are thinking 10 different things. How would you distinguish the capitalism we don't want from the market economies that we do want?
Well, let's just say capitalism is a society where you pay people to go to work, where you need money, where the monetary exchanges is the primary principle of managing the economy, right? It didn't used to be that way. It was just a very a small part of the economy was about involved monetary exchanges. Today is the majority of the economy, but not like not all of it. And what I mean with outcompeting is not that that capitalism should go bankrupt. In the same way, the monopoly on violence, organized violence did not go bankrupt because of capitalism. Capitalism, the monetary exchanges just become the dominant theme. Because if we go 500 years back, politicians, like kings and knights and these kind of people, they were not talking about economy, like how much they were 90% occupied with violence. How can we maximize, our monopoly on violence, and how can we win that war, and how can we, avoid being attacked by them? That was what politics was about. Today, that's a very small part of what politicians are concerned with, but it is still there. So in the future society, yes, there's still going to be a market economy. Like someone needs to, clean up the blood in our hospitals, or clean the streets, and we will still need a lot of things that people won't produce without getting a monetary compensation. But I believe that in the future that it will be a smaller part of life, that our economy, that yes, we have our material needs and there are a few, monetary exchanges, but that for the most time, we are engaging with other people, we are having exchanges with other people without the need of a monetary exchange. That is what I mean.
Well, I think we're just about running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up here. But I'd like to say, first of all, thanks very much for giving us your time. I'd like to recommend everybody The Listening Society by someone called Hansi Freinacht. It's very good. And metamoderna.org is a good repository of all of these ideas. Just to say that, you wrote in the book, or that in the book it says that metamodernism is necessarily transnational, and that the nation state is basically out of its depth when it comes to modern global problems. And that, I think, is what ties Simpol to metamodernism. That Simpol, at least we see it, and I hope you see it too, is it's a political expression of metamodernism, and it resolves a lot of the issues that metamodernism tries to resolve. And I see them both as sort of fellow travelers in the same space. So every success for metamodernism is a success for Simpol, and vice versa. So thank you very much, Emil, and best of luck with all your work.
Thank you. And if I may conclude with the last remark, yes, you were talking about transnationalism, and I believe that the future metamodern political movement needs, by necessity, needs to be transnational, and we even have a name for that movement. The socialists, and they had the international. We need the transnational. An organization or a gathering of people, of metamodernists from all around the world, to act transnational in how can we create metamodern societies around the globe, and disregarding what country you come from. So a transnational swarm of metamodernists seeking to create metamodern examples and laboratories to outcompete the modern society.
Amen to that. Thank you very much, Emil.